Well, I would say a tremendous amount has changed. In fact, many people see the 96 Taiwan Straits crisis as one of the precipitating events for the military modernization that the PLA has been engaged in the 2 decades since that time. And at the time, although they had missiles that they could fire into the waters, they didn't have a lot of such missiles, and there was very little else they could do. And when the U.S. dispatched 2 aircraft carrier groups to the area, the Chinese discovered that they didn't even know exactly where the carriers were, and therefore, really, there was nothing that they could do about U.S. air power. But the limitations of the Chinese military went far beyond just the ability to find aircraft carriers at the time. They really didn't have modern weapon systems, they did not train very vigorously, and the quality of the personnel was quite low back in 1996. So a huge amount has changed since then. They've been producing and adding into their forces a number of modern weapon systems that are quite comparable to those that are in use in the U.S. and other Western militaries these days. They've significantly improved the quality of their training, and they've been recruiting much better educated and more capable people to be both enlisted personnel and officers in their military. So their military capabilities as a whole have increased tremendously. So first of all, the question is, how would they try to go about seizing and holding the island? And I kind of divide this into 2 broad categories. One would be some form of military coercion, where they wouldn't necessarily invade the island, but try to exert enough pressure or punishment on Taiwan that the government would capitulate and allow the Chinese military to occupy the island. And the other would be an outright invasion. So let me talk about the first one first. To coerce Taiwan, there's a variety of different options of ranging from purely symbolic types of demonstrations of force and so on, to a much more coercive, punishing type of campaign that would probably include a blockade of the island and possibly attacks on military and economic targets on the island. And for the symbolic types of attacks, the key factor here would be the will of the people of Taiwan, and whether or not a few missiles in the waters around Taiwan, or the seizure of one of the small islands off of the mainland that are controlled by Taiwan would somehow cause the population to capitulate. And although there's some people who think that this could happen, I personally think it's pretty unlikely, and I think for Chinese military planners it would be probably a bad idea to put all their eggs in the success of that particular basket. The higher end coercive scenarios would basically depend on the ability of the Chinese military to seize air and sea control in the air and waters around Taiwan, and thereby impose a blockade and possibly also launch attacks on targets in Taiwan. Now, they could also attack targets with their ballistic missiles, but China has only about 1,200 or so conventional ballistic missiles that are capable of reaching Taiwan. And although there's not much either Taiwan or even the U.S. could do to prevent those missiles from hitting Taiwan, for comparison purposes, 1,200 warheads is fewer than the average number of bombs that the U.S. dropped on Iraq over a 2-day period in the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. So although they could inflict significant damage, it's probably not enough by itself to cause Taiwan to capitulate. And so therefore they would have to have a more sustained type of campaign that included both air attacks and a blockade of sea and air traffic going in and out of Taiwan. Now, the key issue here is whether or not the U.S. would intervene on Taiwan's side. If the U.S. did intervene on Taiwan's side, my assessment is that as of today and for the next few years anyways, I don't think the mainland has the military capability to seize sea and air control around Taiwan. And therefore, although they could, as I said, launch some attacks on Taiwan and try to interfere with shipping in and out of Taiwan, it probably wouldn't be a sustainable type of campaign and therefore probably not successful. If, on the other hand, the U.S. didn't intervene on Taiwan's side, then my assessment is that the Chinese military does have the capability to succeed in taking sea and air control around Taiwan. The mainland Chinese military continues to have significant weaknesses and flaws, but so does Taiwan's military, and the mainland military definitely has a preponderance of forces that would most likely enable it to eventually win that battle for sea and air control. Now, the other option is an outright invasion of the island, but here we get back to the question of could China succeed in seizing sea and air control in the air and waters around Taiwan, because to invade the island you would need to bring ground forces there, and there's basically only two ways to do that. One is through the air and the other is across the sea. So again, the ability of those forces to safely make that transit would depend on the ability of the Chinese military to protect them from sea and air attack. And to do that, they would need to achieve some form of air superiority and sea control around Taiwan, which brings us back to the issue of whether or not the U.S. would intervene on Taiwan's side. Again, my assessment is that in the next few years, if the U.S. did intervene, then China would not be able to succeed in doing that, and therefore couldn't seize sea and air control around Taiwan, and therefore couldn't launch a successful invasion of Taiwan. Now, even if the U.S. didn't intervene, then although I think the mainland would be able to defeat Taiwan's naval and air forces, making an invasion would still be a highly risky operation for them. First of all, the forces, although they could probably keep them relatively safe from attack from the air or the surface of the ocean, they would not be able to protect them against submarine attack. Now, fortunately for the mainland, Taiwan currently only has 2 combat effective submarines, but they are in the process of trying to acquire more. And though the mainland's anti-submarine warfare capabilities, on the other hand, are quite limited. So it's likely that Taiwan submarines, particularly if they get more of them, could inflict pretty significant casualties on the invasion fleet. And even if that didn't happen, as they got closer to Taiwan, they would have a couple of other problems to deal with. One would be land-based anti-ship missiles that Taiwan has, many of which are mounted on trucks and are therefore would be very difficult for the mainland military to find and neutralize before they could launch their missiles at the invasion fleet. And the other is the possibility of laying sea mines in the approaches to the beaches on Taiwan. Modern sea mines are quite sophisticated and difficult to find and remove, and therefore it would either significantly slow the invasion or else the mainland force would take major casualties as they tried to land the forces if Taiwan did that. So even without U.S. intervention, my assessment is that it would be quite a risky operation for the mainland, and if the U.S. did intervene on Taiwan's side to try to actually invade Taiwan would be borderline suicidal in my assessment. Again, at least for the next few years. Now that could change over time as China's military capabilities continue to improve. So this is obviously the key question. Now the mainland government has specified a number of specific conditions that, according to it, would definitely trigger an invasion. or at least a use of force against Taiwan. These include an overt declaration of independence by Taiwan, Taiwan attempting to acquire nuclear weapons, and some other circumstances as well. Now, most of these are fairly obvious and also pretty unlikely, so my judgment is that they're also therefore fairly low probability that Taiwan would try to do any of these things. So the question is, are there other circumstances under which the mainland leadership might feel compelled to use force against Taiwan? And here, what seems to me to be the most likely scenario would be some sort of situation where the mainland leadership felt that their hold on power was already shaky, or perhaps because of an economic crisis at home, or some sort of challenge to their hold on power. And while that was going on in mainland China, something happened in Taiwan that would be short of an overt declaration of independence by Taiwan, but would fairly dramatically demonstrate the fact that Taiwan is never going to voluntarily accept reunification with the mainland. And I think the combination of those two circumstances could cause the Chinese leadership to feel as if they had a choice of either losing their hold on power in the mainland or having to launch an invasion of Taiwan, as costly and as risky as that might be. So that, to me, is probably the most likely scenario for such a use of force. But, wars do happen. They're always unlikely until the day that they actually occur. And so we definitely shouldn't be complacent and think that, so long as those types of circumstances don't occur, that we are safe from any threat of conflict in the Taiwan Strait. So as I said in my preceding remarks, almost all of the options available to the mainland that have at least the possibility of successfully forcing Taiwan to unify with mainland China involve the mainland's ability to seize sea and particularly air superiority in the area around Taiwan. And therefore, I think that Taiwan's highest priority should be maintaining the ability to at least contest air superiority with the mainland. And there are a number of things that they can do in that regard, which include hardening of their air bases, ensuring that they have the ability to rapidly repair runways that have been damaged by bombs and missiles, and also doing things like acquiring mobile surface-to-air missile systems, and if the U.S. will sell them to Taiwan, advanced fighter aircraft. In addition, I think there are other things that they can do to make it even more risky than it would already be for the mainland to actually try to invade Taiwan. And that could, first of all, include acquiring those submarines that they are talking with, renewed vigor about acquiring these days, and acquiring more of those mobile shore-based anti-ship missiles that they have, and ensuring that they have the capability to rapidly lay sea mines in the approaches to possible invasion beaches.